Kapital is a brand with undeniable influence and a cult following. They've mixed the style of classic Americana with the precision and artistry of Japanese craftsmanship, creating a style that feels both nostalgic and forward-thinking. They draw inspiration from Japanese and American traditions, and in doing so, the brand has carved out a space that's uniquely its own and resonates with people worldwide. Without further ado, this is the history of Kapital. The brand was started by a man named Kiro Hirata after he visited the United States in the 1980s to teach karate. During his time there, he fell in love with American denim and vintage clothes. When he returned to Japan, he headed to Kojima, a small town in the Okayama prefecture, to study the manufacturing process of jeans. This is actually the source of inspiration for the name of the brand, as Kojima is known as the capital of denim. Like, the main street in Kojima is literally named Jean Street. He decided to start his first factory here in 1984 named Kapital, but spelled with a C, and opened a denim and vintage store soon after in 1995. But why did he pick Kojima? See, Kojima's history with denim goes back a long way. The story starts in the 1500s. At the time, the area experienced a population boom. With more people came the need to grow more food, but they found that the soil was too salty to grow staple crops like rice. But you know what plant can grow in salty soil? Cotton. Cotton plantations were soon popping up all over Kojima, which also provided jobs to that growing population. People in Kojima then began to make canvas fabric and soon took over most of the textile manufacturing for Japan. Over the years, the artisans would continue to use their old looms and techniques instead of outsourcing. They used something called a shuttle loom, which is the oldest type of weaving loom. They used to be made by Toyota in the 1920s and aren't even really made at all anymore, as they're known to be slow, noisy, and inefficient, but they're still used because they produce a high-quality roll of fabric that has a finished edge, which stops it from unraveling. That finished edge is what gives selvage denim its name, coming from the self-edge of the fabric. A roll of selvage denim is about half as wide as a roll of standard denim, which means more fabric is needed to make clothes from it. That's another reason why selvage denim clothes are more expensive. So that's where and why Toshikiro started his brand, but it was really his son Kiro who turned Kapital into the powerhouse it is today. Funnily enough, Kiro initially did not even want to join the family business. He actually left Japan to study art in the United States at 18 years old. But like his father, this is where he found his passion for denim and vintage clothing. When he returned to Japan in 1996, he began to work for another Japanese Americana brand, 45 RPM. They also manufacture Japanese denim, and this is where Kiro gained experience as a designer. While working here, he met Eric Kavadik, a photographer who would later become an integral piece of the Kapital team. When Kiro left 45 RPM in 2002 to work for his father's brand, he brought Kavadik on board as the lead photographer. Together, he and Kiro shaped the brand's identity into what we know today, starting by changing the name to Kapital with a K. The two work seamlessly. Kiro designs the pieces, Kavadik captures their essence. Their relationship is also what gave us the iconic Kapital lookbooks, which come out with each collection. The lookbooks use photos to build a world for the reader where they can see environments and people that inspired the collection. Kavadik's story starts in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he funded the beginning of his photography career by selling vintage. At just 19 years old, he taught himself photography by capturing what he found most interesting in the city, usually gang members and bikers. Using cameras paid for by his vintage sales, he was able to earn enough money to travel the world and fully pursue photography. Him traveling is ultimately what led to that job at 45 RPM, as the photos he took in Indonesia caught their attention. This ultimately led him to that job at 45 RPM, as the photos he took in Indonesia was what caught their attention. Kavadik shoots in a reportage style, which is almost like a documentary, focusing on capturing the atmosphere of the scene rather than just the subject. That sense of authenticity, which traces back to his early work in Albuquerque, still defines his work today. What makes his work for brands, and Kapital's lookbooks in particular, stand out so much is his ability to tell a story through images. He doesn't just shoot models, he finds people who embody the character he wants to depict. This approach makes his photos feel lived in and genuine, and creates something that feels both timeless and effortlessly real. In an interview with GQ, Kiro said, "Jeans originated in the USA and my father perfectly mastered the reproduction. So I thought it was my turn to create something new and not just repeat what had already been done. I wanted to create something for the next 100 years into the future." That idea is at the core of Kapital's identity and is what led to one of their most iconic pieces, Century Denim. Introduced in 2010, these jeans are completely covered in Sashiko stitching from top to bottom, proving the brand's dedication to craftsmanship. The manufacturing process is so intricate that it requires 4 different factories to complete. While they have design elements pulled straight from vintage Levi's, like the buckleback and donut buttons, Century Denim is different in that it isn't made from selvage denim. Instead, Kapital uses a 12.5-ounce sand-fried denim, meaning the fabric is pre-shrunk before being cut and sewn. They come in a few different colors, but I'll get into the dyeing process later. Another Kapital staple is the First Jacket. Inspired by and named after the Levi's Type 1 jacket, the First Jacket takes classic American workwear and transforms it into something completely new. It first dropped in fall 2013 after Kiro was asked to design some boro garments for the Louis Vuitton Spring-Summer menswear collection. Later that year, Kapital introduced their own version made from fabric scraps left over from the Louis Vuitton pieces, which is fitting given the history of boro. My personal favorite, and probably the most popular, is the original boro version, though Kapital has also released standard denim and more recently a wool version. The boro First Jacket is my favorite just because it genuinely looks like something that's been worn and repaired for hundreds of years. No two are exactly alike. Every inch is covered in intricate stitching and unique patches, making each piece feel personal. And like Century Denim, the first jacket stays true to Kapital's love for vintage details, featuring a buckleback and donut buttons. But Kapital's icons aren't just about clothing. One of the brand's most recognizable symbols is the smiley face. Introduced by American hippie culture from the 70s and 80s, it's based on the original smiley design created in 1963. You can see the resemblance in both color and shape, but Kapital's version usually has two sets of eyes. Over the years, we've seen this logo on everything from jeans, jackets, shirts, socks, and even watches. They're a way for Kiro to make yet another cultural reference, and they keep his designs more playful by contrasting with the otherwise serious nature and craftsmanship of his work. With a number of references in each garment, we can obviously see that Kapital is built on heritage. Earlier I mentioned traditional Japanese techniques like Sashiko and boro, but the brand's dedication to craftsmanship extends even further into its dyeing processes. Kiro has said that even 100 test runs of a dye aren't enough. We'll start by going over indigo, the most common, before getting into some of the more niche dyes that Kapital uses. The process of indigo dyeing, called esome in Japan, dates back nearly 800 years. It begins with harvesting and fermenting the leaves of the Japanese indigo plant for several months to create tsukumo, the base material for the dye. After that, a deoxidation process takes place to develop the actual dye. The cotton threads are submerged, squeezed out, and left to dry. Supposedly, natural indigo seeps deeper into the cotton than synthetic dye, which is part of what gives Japanese denim the distinct wear patterns it's known for. Another dye they use is kakishibu. It's a dye made from taking unripe persimmons and fermenting them for more than 2 years. It gives a deep orange color, and the dye was traditionally used for keeping bugs away and stopping wood and cloth from getting moldy. The longer it's fermented, the darker the color becomes. The clothes are also more susceptible to fading from the sun, which gives them a really interesting look. Then there's sumi dye, which comes from an ancient Japanese ink making process. It starts with taking animal-based glue made from bones, skin, and other tissues and mixing that with soot. The type of soot and how much is used directly affects the final color. Soot from vegetable oils creates a glossy black, while soot from pine wood gives a richer, deeper shade. Even the size of soot particles changes the tone. Smaller particles result in more red hues, while larger ones bring out more blue tones. Kapital also uses a unique mud dyeing process exclusive to Japan's Amami Oshima Island. The garments are first dyed with the bark of the sexton's bride plant, known locally as tichiki. Afterwards, the craftsman soaks each garment into the iron-rich mud one by one. They're then left to air dry, and the process can be repeated to make the color richer. It results in a beautiful brown and gray dye. Of course, no conversation about Kapital is complete without talking about Sashiko and boro. These techniques define some of the brand's most iconic pieces. Sashiko, which translates to little stabs in Japanese, dates back to the 1600s and was originally used to reinforce fabric through small repeating stitches. Kapital often uses indigo dyed thread for Sashiko, which allows the stitching to blend with the dye of the garment over time, creating a unique effect as the piece ages. Boro, on the other hand, comes from the Japanese word boro, meaning tattered or repaired. It's the result of repeatedly patching and reinforcing a garment with Sashiko stitching. Like many of the best things in fashion, boro was born out of necessity. Poorer people couldn't afford to buy new clothes when they tore, so they got them repaired over and over again. Given that denim was originally workwear, it makes sense that jeans and jackets are some of the most common places we see boro patching today. As Kapital continues to build on its legacy, it's impossible to ignore the massive shift in the brand's trajectory. Recently, it was announced that Kapital had been acquired by Moët Hennessy Louis Vuitton, better known as LVMH. The luxury conglomerate owns around 60 subsidiaries and manages 75 brands, including Dior, Givenchy, Fendi, Celine, Kenzo, Tiffany & Co., Bulgari, Loewe, and Sephora. This acquisition has sparked concern among Kapital fans. Many believe that once LVMH takes over a brand, quality declines while prices skyrocket, something that would be disastrous for Kapital since quality is inseparable from the brand's identity. You can't have Kapital without its craftsmanship. There's also fear that scaling the business will strip Kapital of its soul, turning it into just another high-fashion brand instead of the cult label that it's always been. Another consequence is the potential increase in price and demand for pre-LVMH Kapital pieces on the secondhand market. If the brand's identity shifts, early Kapital items could become even more collectible. All of this comes just a year after the passing of Kapital's founder, Kiro Hirata, on April 28, 2024. This has led to speculation about Kiro's motivations for selling. Some accuse him of selling out and abandoning the vision his father built. I really hope this isn't the end of Kapital as we know it. That's all for now. I really hope you guys enjoyed my first video ever. Thank you for watching Cadmus, and I'll see you next time.